So, hello everyone for today a special session on the MICCAI RISE. We have a special guest with Professor Guang. He's a program committee for MICCAI 2026. And today's session will be mostly a question and answer for most of you who are uh, researcher for the first time, trying to submit to MICCAI, and you might have questions about the submission, page limit, or with your paper and it's between Mick or Kai. So Professor Wang will answer clearly all of your questions that you might have. And without further ado, I give you the stage. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Aurora, for the nice introduction. So thanks for everyone joining this session. I can not see. Oh, I can see all the attendees here. That's great. Okay, so my name is Guang. So currently I'm the leading PC member for this year for the MICCAI 2026, which will be organized, in of Dubai, the really nice country, nice weather. Hopefully you can all joining us. So I think today's session is mainly about to address some of your questions. I already got a really nice list. And maybe first, I just show you this screen. I hope everyone can see my screen. It's the couple papers. Obviously, we have some listed topics of the MICCAI 2026. We haven't changed too much from the last years. And also the deadlines are listed here. I'm not sure. Dana, you want to say a few words about the deadlines and couple papers first before I continue?
Sure. A- Hi everyone. As you can see, the abstract registration deadline is coming up February 12th, so with the submission deadline of February 26th.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think these normally we run a week high of these like firm deadlines. So normally they won't be changed or extended. It's quite different from other conferences because we have really tight, the review and also the AC meta review process. So we try to keep everything, on time. So that's the landing page. I hope everyone can just go to the page and read carefully about the couple paper information, especially the deadlines, the topics, everything. And I also want to remind all our authors. Let me put it a little bit bigger. So basically, we also have the submission guidelines. So essentially, from year to year, all our PC members, we were looking at or revise the couple papers and also the language and also the term and conditions within the couple papers. So again, so for all our authors, I highly recommend you to go to this web page and read into the details about our couple papers, not only the deadline, but some of these policies and terms and conditions. And also we still use the CMT for the manuscript submission. Okay. And not many people notice that under this paper submission tab, actually we also have the paper submission FAQ. So basically these questions, they have been asked like many times from previous years. For example, like the one I just talked to Alvaro and Dan just now. So for example, how to choose like a Mick versus Kai like papers. So basically we already gave some guidelines here in this FAQ. So I also highly recommend you just go to this tab, the paper submission, not only read the paper submission guidelines, but also read the paper submission FAQs. Maybe you can find the answers over there. All right. Just remind you guys, I when I share my screen, I cannot see other function of the Zoom. So if you have got any questions, you can put into the chat box or the question answer box. Okay. Right. So I will go through some of the pre-submitted questions. I think I got it from Alvaro again. Thanks for him to summarize everything so nicely. So the first question I got is, how should we decide whether our work is better framed as a methodological paper or as an application translational study? So what are the common misclassifications? I think that's a really good question. And also, I think that has been asked like many times before as well. So basically, I think the methodology papers, they may consist of like a traditional, bedrock of the MICCAI conferences. So that's the MICCAI we are looking for. So we looking for the innovative like methods, technologies, or the systems that in the areas of interest to the MICCAI society. So the core requirements for the methodology paper is the innovation. So that's the primary contributions must be the method itself, right? So if this can be includes, for example, the novel mathematical like formulations, like a new deep learning architectures, innovative like loss functions, so on and so forth. So there's some like methods like innovations. And also we hope to see some sort of like a state of the art like advancements. So the authors must be clearly demonstrate, how your proposed method already advanced beyond the current SOTA methods. So the comparison should be, quantitative, but also heavily on these sort of like a theoretical justifications. So that's the definition, or the core requirements of the methodology papers. Um, I mean, there's a common like pitfall is the mm, methodology imposter. For example, you may already know something like a well-known architectures, for example, the standard UNets or maybe the region transformer-based methods. You just apply those like a method to a new data sets. I wouldn't say that thing is like a methodology like advancements, right? So that's maybe too incremental to for the VCAI, the submissions. On the other hand, so to define the translational or the application studies, the core requirements would be the impact demonstration. So, for example, the studies can demonstrate the clinical value using some existing technologies or the adaptation of some of the SOTA methods to the new clinical problems. So I highlight the new clinical problems here, right? So maybe, there's some new imaging modalities, new like, patient cohorts. So, but different from the methodological papers, application studies require like a rigorous performance evaluations on large data sets or in the, in human feasibility studies. So those sort of like a, novelties that can be classified as the application or translational studies. And also we want to emphasize the reproducibility and the relevance. So as this year, we also promote, the studies that can help with the clinical translation, especially those distance regions, those like underdeveloped like regions. So we hope the studies can be rigorously demonstrate the clinical relevance and also the variability in the medical practice. So that's the core requirements for both the methodological papers and the application and translational studies. So we want to see some novelties there, either in the methodology part or either in the clinical application. We don't want to have something like too incremental. So that's the key part of these two different papers. I cannot see the chat at the moment, but if you have any like a further, question, please just put in the chat box. Okay. Another thing I also want to remind our authors is like how to choose, for example, the medical imaging computing versus the computer assisted intervention is kind of like a strategic choice, right? And for some cases, maybe for many of the cases, they are like a hybrid papers. So you both have the methodology like advancements and also the clinical novelties. I think that's fine. But I just want to remind our authors, we do have this like primary and secondary, the areas choices. For example, you can choose different modalities. You are looking at different organs. And also you can have like a methodology, like advancements. So you can put the methodology advancements as your primary, and also you can add another like secondary, choice for the clinical applications. Okay, so I think that's the um, answer for the first question. All right. Um, if no further for this question, I will continue. Okay. So the second question is, given the 2026 theme from algorithms to clinical translation, so how much clinical validation is realistically expected for paper to be competitive? Again, that's a really, really good question. Let's actually emphasize our key components of the MICCAI 2026. Okay, so the theme is from the concept to the clinical. As MICCAI conference, I mean, different from other like more pure or hardcore like machine learning conferences like ICML or multiple computer vision conference like CVPR. So we want to make sure our methodology is not totally blue sky. So we want to see these like a translational power. So I can give you maybe a few points, 3 or 4 points about the expectations of competitive papers. So firstly, I want to say we want to design something, for example, statistically rigorous, and also we want to quantify, for example, the uncertainty or the confidence of the methods. I think that's especially important. So I can give you example. When people normally publish papers, they always report some of these like quantitative values, for example, the dice scores for the segmentation. Well, maybe the improvements like a 1% or 2% of the dice scores, it not really makes sense for the clinical studies. I think that's common sense, right? So I suggest like all our authors can go like at least one further step to do some statistical analysis, saying, okay, the results can really make some clinical significance for the study, right? So the second point is maybe we also need to consider about the data diversity. I understand lots of studies currently they are running on the open data sets. That's a good thing. As MICCAI 2026, we also trying to promote the open access data and also the benchmark studies. But the thing is, we also need to consider about the data diversity. For example, maybe some studies just running on the single scanner, for example, or on the single demographic. So less studies can be less competitive compared to some studies can demonstrate like multi-center study or diverse populations. So that's the second point to make your paper more competitive. Again, the third point is beyond the accuracy. Okay, so we want to quantify the methodologies like in a robust way, and also we want to make sure our methodology can be generalizable for variants like data sets. So, for example, in particular for the papers in the clinical translation session, so we hope the validation can be extended to the reliability like evaluations and the generalizable like evaluations. So people can have like a discussions, for example, into the usability, the user interaction, adoption, and the acceptance of these like developed like methods. So we need to have like a novel evaluation metrics to make sure our clinical translation is robust. And also we need to think of, for example, the feasibility with versus the scale, especially for the computer-aided intervention papers. The validation burden is slightly different. So, for example, how to demonstrate the clinical feasibility is required, but we also need to think of like not just evaluate on a single subject or only animals or only phantoms. So we want to see some kind of like a rigorous like system integration evidence. So that's particular for the Kai papers to make them like more uh, competitive. Okay. I think that's my answer for this question. So we want to emphasize the idea from the algorithms to the clinical translation, but we need to have like a rigorous validation for those. Okay. All right. I would go to the next question. So next question is if a paper mainly combines existing techniques in a subtle way to address a new clinical problem, how the authors should argue the novelty. Well, again, I mean, there's a balance between, the novelty and feasibility. So in general speaking, from my perspective, we do not want to see something like um, you pile up like loads like different, for example, the neural networks architectures to make the methods really, really complicated, right? So we don't want to see like just incremental values of these like design patterns. What we want to see is like you really understand about the data, understand about the nuance of the clinical questions, and based on the data properties and also the clinical questions, you design those models. Okay, so it's not like you combine existing techniques, for example, okay, a pre-trained transformer, a well-known like restoration methods, or some like different loss functions to address a new clinical problem. It's more like a um, top-down methodology. So you understand about the data property first, understand about the clinical problem first, and then trying to design some new methodologies to solve the problems. So it's more like a hypothesis-driven and motivation-driven methods to integrate your methods. Right? So there are some strategical like arguments you can think of, when you write your papers. So the first one is the innovate like applications. So if you go to our guidelines clearly mention like the application um, of existing method to a new problem is valid contribution. However, it also emphasizes that we should argue these methods can match the data properties, can match the clinical questions, right? The second point is about the new insight. So the novelties can be argued by providing new insight into existing methodologies. For example, you can say, okay, demonstrating why standard methods failed in some of these specific like clinical scenario, and how some of these specific like combinations of techniques or the networks can resolve this failure. I mean, that's a high value contribution. Okay. It's not like from bottom up, you compile like different methods for some problem. It's more sort of like you understand about from top level, what's the problems, what are the gaps, what are the motivations in clinical settings to design your method. Um, Again, for some of these high papers, the novelty often lies in the novel intervention system or the robust like system integration. I think that's also fine. So the authors should argue that the system is novel. Even some of the components it's just off the shelf, right? So you can use some off the shelf methods, but you need to argue that the system itself is novel and has clear like clinical needs for this kind system to be integrated. All right. Um, Another new point we want to address in our MICCAI 2026 is called frugal innovation. So we want to build up something like a cost-effective, let's call it a frugal technology approach to implementing, for example, expensive solution, especially for those like you know, um, highly demanding, like the neural networks. We require lots like computing power for some of these kind methods. We require like a really complicated system to build up. So if you can demonstrate you can build up like a similar performance using more cost-effective method, I think that's another novelties we can mention for these kind of like clinical translational studies, especially these lines with the equity and also the global health like seems like MICCAI 2026 trying to promote. Okay. Um, I will give a short break here. Any questions from the audience? I didn't see anything from the chat, but if you want to maybe, you know, unmute yourself, you can also speak up. Any other questions here?
We do have a couple of questions in the
Right.
Q&A.
Okay.
Do
Right.
you see them now?
Oh, I opened the chat box. I didn't see
It's in
anything.
the Q&A. So I can read them to you if
Oh,
that
right.
helps.
Oh, yeah, I found the box. Okay, sorry.
Okay, no
I
problem.
misunderstood. Right. Yeah, I can read them. So the first one is, if anyone proposing a new method, how many datasets one should use to validate method? Well, we don't have a general guideline for the numbers basically. So we want to say, okay, we're trying to promote the study for diverse data sets. Maybe, if you can only find one particular data set to fit into your, methodology, like a hypothesis, I mean, that's fine. But we want to encourage people, to get like the like full validation for diverse data sets. Okay. Second one is is the related work section recommended, or is fine to merge into and related works together? I believe most MICCAI papers do not include a separate. Well, yeah, let's there's some like a strategical thinking, right? Because the MICCAI papers, they are page limited, so it's single column, 8 pages. So you need to think of like a what's your emphasis will be. For example, if your paper, your work is more related to the methodology developments, I would definitely say, okay, you should mention something like a previous method, why there's some gaps, why why the current, SOTA method motivated you to design something new, right? So I think the related work still makes sense, but maybe you need to have some special thinking of the page you can use, and also maybe you can use more spaces for the theoretical derivation or maybe results or the discussions for the clinical translation. So I think there's a strategical thinking. Next question: do we need to provide GitHub link? Yeah, that's a good question. I think I will talk about that later. So basically, we inherited some of the policies from the last year. So we wouldn't allow people to attach the codes directly as the supplementary, but we highly recommend people to have the GitHub link for the work to be included. But we need to anonymize the code. Okay, you cannot reveal your identities in the code. Okay. The, there's another question. I had a question regarding the font sizes. I noticed in many previous papers, the tables, yeah, okay, whether these allows. Um, yeah, actually, we clearly mentioned in our author guidelines, we cannot change the font size. Okay, even the spaces of the paper, we need to use align with the standards templates. Okay, so we don't encourage or allow people to use like smaller size. So you just use the standard size of the files, right? If such like a violation of these like policies be found by the ACs or by the reviewers, so you have the risk of the papers to get like a desk rejection. Okay, so that's my answer. Um, yeah. Normally, how many statistical analysis is needed to be included in the paper? Well, there is no definite answer for that. I mean, it depending on your data sets. For example, if your data like follow some standard like Gaussian distribution, okay, you can run some standard like paired t-test, that's fine, right? If your data more complicated, maybe some multivariate like static analysis is needed. So I can just only recommend you to run some statistical analysis. There's no numbers I can say clearly. Is this acceptance to shorten references? I wouldn't recommend to do that. Please just use the standard, templates to do everything. Does MICCAI accept benchmark focus papers in the main track? Yes, absolutely. That's what we want to emphasize and also trying to promote in the MICCAI 2026. We welcome the benchmark based like studies and also the open datasets studies. How are the new dataset submission reviewed? What should be taken in consideration for these types of papers like new models? Well, I guess you are referring to the benchmark studies here. I mean, yeah, the styles can be a little different because you may not have like a new model architecture, but you need to clearly label your submission to the data sets or the benchmark studies. So we already have another, essentially, if you can see my screen here, we also have our new reviewer guidance. Okay, so basically, we also mentioned clearly, like for all our benchmark studies, the reviewers need to follow the guidance over there to review the papers for certain criteria. These days, the computational requirements to make Nova are significantly higher, but making Nova use of existing operational models is more accessible. Is there upper limits? Well, actually, no, we don't have any limits for the papers to be accepted. I mean, from the methodology papers or from the clinical translational papers. So I think the key here, as I mentioned here, is like we do not want to see the incremental work, like just using some off-the-shelf methods to apply to a random problem, right? So we want to say something like, you find clear like the clinical motivations methodology gaps, and then you can build up your method based on that, right? So that's the key here. Once a paper is not considered in the main MICCAI, can it be submitted? Oh, yes, absolutely. We welcome papers to be submitted to the workshop. According to the intent submission guidelines of this year, is at least one author should volunteer to review. Yeah, there's an obligation for the authors to review the paper. Students. Well, yeah, we have discussed this within our PC teams. For example, if the paper only have one author, or the paper all have like student authors who do not meet the review like eligibility. I mean, this will be discussed case by case. Okay, so that will be reviewed directly by our PC team, and we will let you know if we can waive your review obligation. Does MICCAI consider manuscript focus on clinical translation do not directly involve medical imaging or some? Well, I think in general, you need to choose your paper that follows MIC or CHI categories, right? So I would say the assumption is correct. We need to have some relevance, broadly speaking, related to the biomedical engineering or with the computational aided intervention. So that's the key components we need to have in the main conference. Yeah, I think I already answered that question. For the reference, please follow the standard format provided by you. Okay, so you do not change the standard style like the latex or the Word style to make it shorter, just cheating the system. Well, yes, for some of the papers, like if they are with huge list of the authors, yeah, we can definitely allow some of the modifications for that. That's some special cases, okay. But do not change them like for everything. You shorten the author list and also the journal or the conference names. For the supplementary materials, is there any standard formats? Well, yes. If you go to our paper submission guideline, so you can see clearly what is the format of the supplementary materials is here, right? So you can go to CLATS. So we aligned with last year. So basically, we can only accept the video based, the supplementary. Actually, that's also a question in my question list. So we wouldn't allow people, for example, to cheat the system. Like you submit something like a video, but you incorporate some of these like slides into the video. That's not allowed. Okay. Any limit on data set since medical data set? Well, there's no limitation of the data sets. We do understand, for example, some rare diseases, you do have like a really limited number of data. That's still okay to report the methodology on that. There's no limits or bias towards that. We just want to emphasize if the data is available, we want to see the methodology to apply widely on on different data sets to prove the generalizability of your methods. Okay, right. All right. I think no open questions at the moment. I can maybe continue to my question list. Okay, just give me 1 second. Right. So the questions on my list is, what aspect of the paper contribution is weighted mostly heavily during the review process? Well, reviewers, I mean, they have given like a really clear like instructions to weigh the contributions by asking, is a paper, sufficiently high clinical impacts, or the have really high impact of the methodology like innovation. So that's the crucial instruction for the reviewers. So what we weight mostly, so the first one is the significance. So the primary, for example, the metric is whether the paper of the wide interest in the community or have great impact for particular clinical problems. So that's the significance we need to think about. Another thing I think I already also mentioned is the substantial versus incremental questions. Okay, so the reviewers will weigh whether the work makes sense, like for the substantial contributions, or it's just like mostly incremental. See, so I would suggest all our authors need to frame your work as a step change in the capability or understanding, not just like marginal performance improvements. So that's the key here um, for the weighting of the reviewers. So finally, I also just mentioned about the rigorous evaluation. So you need to include something like particular strong evaluation to list it like a major strengths of your paper and the results. But the results must be hypothesis driven to prove your hypothesis. So that's the most important suggestions here. So for my next question, are negative or mixed clinical results ever accepted at MICCAI if the study design is rigorous and informative? Well, I mean, in general, like the scientific community often fears about the negative results. They are like unpublishable. But actually, in our MICCAI 2026 guidelines, we also suggested like a more nuanced views here, like provided the study is rigorous. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention here is we want to promote this transparency. So the authors require to report the performance measurements accurately, not just only report the positive results. Okay, we also hope to see at least in your discussion section, you mentioned about both the strengths and also the weakness of your algorithm. And also we need to have these like a valuable insights. Okay, if a rigorous study demonstrates that a popular method fails in specific clinical context, that's totally fine. People always saying, okay, somewhat like when the new method being proposed, like transformers, they say, okay, all these methods can work quite well. Like when people uh, publish the segment and anything method, right? There are a whole bunch of papers saying, okay, they got like really, really good results. But I would say, okay, we, as MICCAI 2026, we suggest authors to make critical thinkings about the previously published methods. And you can report negative result of these like previous methods, and then that can motivate quite well of your new methodology developments. Again, I think we also need to emphasize the writing and logic of the discussion sections. Okay, so you need to discuss about the limitations. That's mandatory for every paper. So if a paper that's trying to hide the negative results, I wouldn't say that's a good point to submit those papers. Again, regarding the rigorous designs, I mean the negative results are acceptable if the study design is informative. So we need to have these results included. Okay, I see an additional question here. Why negative results are sufficiently valuable? Reviews often dismiss like a lack of performance. How can we ensure fair reviews? Well, that's a really good question. But essentially, the scientific community, we have the that's quite normal to have debates, right? So basically, I would suggest you put into the negative results, but do some more rigorous statistical like analysis. For example, for some of the data, maybe you got like really good results. For part of them, you got maybe less good results, right? But you need to discuss according to the data property, according to the challenges of the problems. You need to justify why these results have been obtained. So that's my suggestions. And then we also have this rebuttal process in the MICCAI. Even the reviewers have different views on your results, on your data sets. You can do the rebuttal. And we also have really strong roles for our ACs. So basically, our ACs not only looking at or moderate the review process, they also have their meta reviews to be given. And we also give like clear guidelines for both the reviewers and also the ACs. Like they need to understand about the negative results. Okay. After presenting a paper at MICCAI, authors allowed to submit extended version to journals. Well, that's another really common question. I think that's totally fine. And also we encourage people to submit like a extended version to the journals, not only medical image analysis or IEEE, TMI, other science or nature subjournals to make sure our impact can be like extended, right? However, people need to notice for different journals, they have different rules. For example, if I remember correctly, like a media or the TMI journals, they require only 30% of the overlapping to be allowed, right? So you need to have like another 70%, I mean, for both the methodology, innovation or the results or more rigorous like a benchmark studies to be included in the extension. But you need to check with the uh, journal author guidelines for such extension. Um, okay. Next question on my list. Yeah, if a paper spans Mick and Kai fairly evenly, so how should author decide which one to select as the primary category? Yeah, so that's a really common question. Again, I want to refer to our paper submission FAQ. So actually, well, there's already one question, yeah, mentioned here. That's the Mick versus Kai, right? So basically, you need to read the definition of MIC and also Kai papers. I'm pretty sure like you can choose the primary ones and the secondary ones. So we have both of these. You can list it, right? So just refer to this one, and then you can find the answer. Okay. Um, is it possible to submit codes as supplementary material yet? So this question I already answered. So we do not allow you to submit the codes as the supplementary this year. So if you go to the author guideline, you can see clearly what can be included in the supplementary material. So what we do encourage people to do is you include the GitHub links, but do not reveal your identities. Okay, so we need to still maintain the blinded review for the paper. All right. Yeah, next question is really good. The people ask, what is the considered acceptable like versus risks using LLMs like a ChatGPT when writing a MICCAI paper, right? So that's a really good question. I think a lot of people maybe noticed the recent issues of other big conferences, right? Um, in general, we at MICCAI, we only allow people to use LLMs as the general purpose writing assistants. Okay, for example, you can using ChatGPT to check your grammar, polishing the text, or do some editing. That's okay. That's absolutely fine. But we do not allow people to use, for example, ChatGPT or any LMs to generate the scientific contents. Okay, you cannot use the AI to generate the literature reviews or fake some of these like references, or even trying to use the GPT to do some kind of like a results generation. That's highly risky. Okay, so if those like a um you know, behaviors have been identified by the reviewers or by the ACs, you are at risk of the desk rejection. Okay. And also, we wouldn't allow AI or LMs to be the co-author for our MICCAI papers. Okay. Um, yes, yeah, exactly. So there's another question about how about the AI coding tools, right? So we understanding they're like a various tools about you can use to do the coding. I mean, in general, we can allow that. You want to use that as a little helper for you to write in the code, but we do not recommend you, for example, you totally rely on something like a agentic AI, to run the experimental studies and get the results, even interprets the results instead by you as the author for that. Okay, so we wouldn't recommend to do so. Okay, and also, although we don't have like a third party like detection of these AIs, we have clear guidelines in the reviewers guidelines and also in the AC's guidelines. If we find anything like hallucination in the results, or the incorrect or fake citations, that will lead to the automatic desk rejection for your papers. Okay, right. So that's about the usage of AI. Um, the next question on my list is there any new policy, for example, desk rejection regarding the hallucination or incorrect citations, to avoid what happens at Neuralink this year? I think I already partially answered the questions. Okay, so I just want to emphasize again the desk rejection triggers. Okay, so basically all our authors must be vigilant about the following triggers for the automatic desk rejection. So the first one is the templates manipulation. So do not change any like font size, modifying the margin spacing, trying to fit in more of the contents into your paper. Okay, so what you can do is maybe using the AI to polish the writing, to make your writing more compact. So you can do such things to polish the writing, but do not um, modify the standard templates, right? The second one is we need to be normalize everything. Okay, let's including if you adding any names in your main text in your GitHub, or in any like a file properties like header files that can reveal your names, your app affiliations. That will also render the task rejection. And also, we need to have one of the courses to sign up as a reviewer. Okay, some of the cases I already mentioned that will be reviewed case by case, but for most of the cases, we do have this review like an obligation. That's the third point to trigger the desk rejection. The fourth one is dual submission. Okay, we do not allow the dual submission. We do find some of the previous years we have such dual submissions. Even people just modify the paper slightly, on slightly different data sets and submit two papers into MICCAI. So such things will render the desk rejection, and you also have the potential risk to be added to our blacklist. Right? That's not a good thing. The fifth point is about the supplementary violations. Okay, so do not upload, PDFs or other prohibit like contents in the supplementary zip files. Only the videos. Do not incorporate any like slides into your supplementary. Okay. I got some data question. How can we anonymize the GitHub link in the abstract? Is there any special? Well, you can search online. Okay, so they are like a anonymized GitHub version for that. And just also make sure, sometimes when you're uploading the code, you write some comments, right? Some of the comments maybe can also reveal your identity. So we highly recommend you to check online how to do that, and then also how to avoid the risk of your revealing your identities. if a reviewer use AI generated feedback and contains yes, okay, well, yeah, we also have really clear guidance for the reviewers. So they do not allow, I mean, for both the reviewers and also for the ACs, we do not allow them to upload your paper to any AI platform. Okay, so they cannot do that, right? If we that that behavior is identified, and then we will ban the reviewer. I mean, you know, from the database, and um, that will be some punishment for the reviewers and for the ACs if they do so. And also, if our authors find those behaviors, we are more than welcome for you to just report to our PC team, and we will review that case by case. All right. Okay. Right. My next question is it safer to post on archive before or after the MICCAI submission deadline? Yes, that's a really common question asked many times before. So we do allow people to upload the files to archive, and we strongly suggested like the reviewers or the ACs they cannot search, or they don't search the papers only archive to see the authors identities. We highly recommend they don't do so, right? But yes, I think that's the answer for this question. We do allow authors to put the preprints on the archive. Actually, let's come to the final question on my list. So if you were submitting your first MICCAI paper today, what single piece of advice would you give to the author? Um, well, that's a good question. I mean, from our record, we can see that the MICCAI conference growing really bigger and bigger every year. So there, obviously, we have many first time, submissions. So I as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, so I highly recommend you guys, if you are the first time um, author for the MICCAI paper, you go to our website to find some relevant information. Okay, so let me just put it slightly smaller. Yeah, so basically, this is the landing page. You can go to the home. You can see where is the MICCAI conference, some of these messages. And more importantly, you can see all these like couple papers and, the paper submission guidelines and FAQ and informations. I mean, normally people only read, for example, the authors only read the paper submission guidelines and FAQ. I also highly recommend you guys to read the review process. You can understand about how people value your paper, right? I think that's also quite important. And also, our authors can be our future reviewers. We also recommend people to do so, right? So you need to read such like a guidelines to get more understanding about the MICCAI emphasis of each year, and also our promotions, and also our communities more clearly. So I would suggest you to read all these like informations. That's also contains, for example, the rebuttal guidelines, right? So if you get into that stage, you definitely need to refer to the guidelines to do the rebuttal for your paper, right? And also I mentioned to you guys about the desk rejection criteria. So please review those like points in the paper guideline as well. So do not include any violation for those particular points, and also you can try to avoid the desk rejections. Um, Again, some of these like new policies, I mean, relatively new, maybe from last year. So we do have this reviewer obligation. Okay, so hopefully you can sign up as our reviewers. So do not missing the deadline like February 12th, and also there's some key guidelines. I think Diana mentioned like at the beginning, for example, the abstract like registration and also our final submission deadline. Okay, so just pay attention to those deadlines. So that's the advice for the first time submission. Okay, so I think I already went through all the questions in my list. Any further questions? Hello. Yeah, please speak up
Hi.
yourself. Oh, hi, Dana.
Hi, I
That's
don't
you.
think there are any more questions in the Q&A.
Right, okay.
So one more chance. Does anybody else have a question they'd like to enter? No, I think you've answered everything, Guang.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, we got so many attendees here today. That's really nice. Okay. Thanks so
Well,
much, Dana. Again,
thank
yeah,
you
for
very
organizing
much
the session.
thank you so much for your time today and for taking so many questions and all the answers you've provided. For everyone, the recording of this session will be added to the MICCAI Society YouTube channel. I see a question's come in.
Well, yes, that can vary a little bit. I mean, we try to secure, at least three reviewers for one paper. Sometimes some of the paper because the submissions going, growing quite quite fast each year. So maybe some of them go to the emergency reviewers. So they are like the numbers may vary a little bit. Um, uh, I don't understand the second question. Someone tried to point low, maybe. I guess you mean the average of the reviewers' scores is low. Well, yes, again, that will be reviewed case by case. So the first stage is the reviewer comments, right? And also the ACs need to check the reviews. If your paper do have like fewer like reviews compared to other papers, ACs will help to secure like more reviews. And essentially, if any problems at the end, so our PC team will still getting to mitigate any risks or problems for the papers. Okay, all right. Okay, I think
Okay,
that's it.
thanks very much. We will,
Okay, we got another one. Sorry.
we have a few
If
more
we are
minutes.
submitting a new benchmark, it is mandatory to publish before the paper deadline. If I understand your question correctly, I mean, yes, we have the same deadline for all the paper submission, right? So if you submitting a new benchmark, then we need to have it like before the deadline. And I'm not quite sure if you refer to something like for the workshops because some of the workshops they also or challenges they also have the benchmark study, right? So they have like separate deadlines we need to follow. Okay, so that's the different case. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Cool.
Okay, I think
Mhm.
we'll call it there. Thanks
Yeah.
again.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks, guys, for joining this session. Yeah. If any
okay,
questions, you can always find me. You know how to find
sounds
me.
good. Have a good
All
day,
right.
everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks, Diana. Bye. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.